Okay, so we're actually going to start 2 minutes early for our 3:45 research brief presented by Joan Kloth Zanard, called Using the Parental Acceptance Rejection Questionnaire, otherwise known as the PARQ, in Parental Alienation Research.
So, first things first, this isn't something that I did. This isn't a product I created. This is something that was done by Ron Rohner, Bill Burnett, and several other people. So I'm presenting it for them. How did we get here? I was looking something up on splitting. And I came across the Rohners again, 10 years later after I'd communicated with them, and this popped up. And I'm like, oh my God, Bill, why are we not presenting this at the conference? This is really good stuff. The answer was, well, I'm not presenting it. The Rohners aren't coming. You get to do it. And that's how I'm here. So I got to figure out here we go. There's these are the other people, Kathleen Ray, Milgan, Gregory, and then of course Bill and Ron. This is a questionnaire that was developed, and I'm not going to read the slides all the way through. You're going to have the PowerPoint to help determine children and adults, the parents, acceptance and rejection. It's a questionnaire. I'm going to base this mostly on the children because I think that fits better for right now. It's formulated to recognize and give a value to the level of splitting that a child or a person, if it's an adult, might exhibit. The questionnaire was provided to 45 severely alienated children and 71 non-alienated children for a total, I think it was like 116 participants. The results were then compared and used to create the PARQ gap score. What that means is they compared the score of one parent to the other. The difference in between is the gap. This score was used to show a disparity between the child's PARQ for the father and the child's PARQ for the mother score, which was adapted, and that's how they adapted it into this research. So the results, the PARQ gap score of 90 was used as a cut point. In other words, that's your cutoff point in determining a child's level of acceptance and rejection that would indicate alienation. The test has a 99% ability to accurately distinguish alienated children from not alienated children. The other wonderful part about this is it's objective, okay? It's scored, it's done on paper, but also can be done on a computer, and therefore there's less chance of human error. Conclusion, through this research, the team was able to prove parental alienation from other versions of estrangement and refusal to contact a parent. This gave the team valuable support for their PARQ gap, which is a tool for professionals when diagnosing and engaging a child or children's possibility of alienation via what I'm going to call parental bullying. We don't allow children to bully. We should not be allowing parents to bully children either. Next slide. The psychological testing. This was formulated as an adjunct from an original product that they had done, but it's called the Parental Acceptance Rejection Questionnaire, or PARQ. It was developed in 2005, was the starting point. It contained 16 questions related to a child's perceptions of the parents' behaviors related to each parent. How they accepted them, how they rejected them, what level. It was part of their interpersonal acceptance rejection theory that Rohner had originally come up with and that Bill had coordinated with them on. IPART is evidence-based. It is related to the idea of a socialization and lifespan of development. This theory is formulated around the predication and explanation of related to parental alienation, acceptance rather, and rejection. We're looking at the PARQ father, how the PARQ father looks in the child's beliefs about their father's love, their acceptance and rejection toward them, and the same for the mother. While PARQ can be compared to other tests and studies, it was initially created as part of the IPART theory, as I said, used in hundreds of the cases to assess children's belief system about their parents' love for them. It has been tested around the world. So this is not like we tested a small little group of people here in the state of Connecticut. This was tested around the world, and I believe it was 51 states. Am I correct, Bill? Translated. The PARQ is done by either paper or pencil and on a computer. This allows for completely and unobjective scoring of the results, leaving no room for human error or influence by a human. This is important because there's no subjective. They can't turn around and say, well, you scored it. How do you know that your scoring wasn't, you didn't have a bias and influence it? Measuring the splitting. The authors were able to design this research, were able to demonstrate that the PARQ was able to measure self-protective splitting that occurs with children in alienation. Self-protective meaning, is the child splitting because they really don't like this other parent, or is it a self-protection mode because they're concerned about losing the love and respect of one parent? The PARQ father and PARQ mother was given to, like I said, to 116 children and adolescents whose family dynamics included children from intact families, divorced families, neglected children, and children who were alienated. So it's a pretty wide and diverse group. What the authors discovered was that neglected children had ambivalence toward the less preferred parent. Alienated children tended to manifest splitting. One parent was all good, one parent was all bad. And furthermore, that pattern appeared from the PARQ scores that neglected children were vastly different from the pattern of alienated children who took this PARQ exam. So neglected children showed up at one point with the alienated children. There was a completely different level. To measure this difference in scores, the PARQ gap was created. This PARQ gap demonstrated an unequivocal variation between the PARQ father and PARQ mother scores. The theory or hypothesis was that there would be, for this research, was there will be a major gap between neglected versus alienated children. They believed it would produce a huge inconsistency between the two groups, and that this discrepancy would be such a contrast that it would be easy to discern an alienated child from a neglected child or a child who's truly abused. Participants. As I said, there were 116 participants that were broken down into 35 from intact families, 20 children from just a divorced family with no conflict and divorce issue, no issues, 16 children from that were neglected by fathers, 24 children alienated from their fathers, and 21 children alienated from their mothers. The sample items this happens to be what was on the mother's test. The questions that might have been used were things like, my mother lets me know she loves me. This would have designated a warmth or an affection. What's the level of their acceptance that their mother really was warm and affectionate to them? My mother yells at me when she is angry. My mother pays no attention to me. My mother does not really love me. So each of them had a category. So hostility and aggression versus, then you had indifference and neglect, and then you had undifferentiated rejection. These were all done on what's called a 4-point Likert scale. And in their particular thing, it was almost always true, almost never true. So that was their scoring base from 1 to 4. And they used a reverse scoring, used to calculate perceived coldness and lack of affection, or rejection, or perceived not caring, and so on. Scores ranged from a 60 for an acceptance. If you were around a 60, it showed that children accepted the parent, to 240, which was clearly a rejection. A midpoint of 150 leans toward rejection more than acceptance, but scores between 140 and 150 showed that rejection, but not expressly enough to say that it was more rejection than acceptance. This questionnaire takes about 10 to 15 minutes on the short version, on the 60 question one. Right. With a meta-analysis of 51 studies worldwide, the mean weighted alpha coefficient for the child PARQ was 0.89. We also have scores for the adult PARQ, which the parent taking the similar test. It was 0.95 and 0.84 rather. There is also, just so you understand, there's 2 different PARQ tests for the adults. One's as an adult, one's as a parent. the adult being as a child, reflective to how they were raised and they felt with their parents, I believe, Bill, would be the correct term. And the other one being how they felt their child feels about them in the relationship. The PARQ is used in research, clinical settings, schools, courts, and applied areas, has proven instrumental on many levels. And I'm going to tell you, if you're doing an evaluation, this, along with several other tools that have been mentioned throughout this conference, are great tools to include in evaluation. We've got 3 or 4 fabulous tools that experts have created that will back each other up to prove that it's alienation. This is one of the first tables that I've put in here. With this one, as you can see, in the intact family, we're pretty much equal. Here, divorced family, pretty much equal. We start hitting neglect to have this little bit higher score, okay, on the PARQ father and the PARQ mother. But when we start hitting the alienated, look how high we hit for the issues. I'm sorry, was there something? Yeah, I know, they need to be shorter. Results. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but intact families, father-mother scores are almost exactly the same. I don't think I need to read this to you guys. You pretty much saw it and understood. Next. So now we have a PARQ gap, which determines the unequivocal variances between the child's response on the PARQ father versus the PARQ mother. And the gap scores indicated the following. I'm going to show you the slide, but I'm going to go back for a second, okay? The PARQ gap in intact families and divorced families were exceptionally low, meaning that both parents were seen as both being loving and accepting. The PARQ gap scores were neglected by their fathers was markedly greater than either intact or divorced families, meaning the child saw the neglectful parent as not as loving or accepting, but not nearly as diverse as it was, with the PARQ alienated children. The PARQ gap, as you saw in this previous slide, the difference here is huge between the acceptance and rejection of these parents. That's where your gap comes in. And Bill, correct me if I explain this wrong. So that was table 1. Now the next one we have is this table here, which, again, it's a table that distinguishes some of those numbers that we were talking about. On to the next one. Again, this is another table showing, the differences in the PARQ gap that we were seeing. Statistical results for table 1, there's a marked variance between family types. We could see that. And then one which was significant was the mean PARQ gap scores for both the father alienated group and the mother alienated group. These presented as remarkably more elevated than those of neglected children. What does that mean? That means that we can, when giving this test, we can say, this child, the difference between a child who's neglected and a child who's alienated, we can tell that there is a major difference because that gap in their acceptance or rejection of their parents is relative to that alienation or non-alienation in abuse, in a neglect or abuse case. Again, this is another chart explaining that more, numerically for you. Okay, so using the PARQ gap to identify parental alienation. A PARQ gap score of at least 90 points difference between the PARQ mother and PARQ father is used to indicate a high probability of alienation. So I'm going to read the rest of the parent, then I'll give you an equation. Based on a high probability of alienation based on a child's presentation of one parent as more accepting of them than the other. This holds true so long as the PARQ scores for the favored parent are between 60 and 70. Any parent who scores 140 would be considered the rejected parent. But beware of the following exception. The PARQ gap cut point of 90 only is very viable if the favored parent scores is exceptionally low. The exception to this rule is when one parent scores over 90, say 100, and the other parent scores 190, indicating there's a 90-point gap between them. But we have one parent who has scored way over the 60-70 for acceptance and rejection. In this scenario, the 100 scoring parent is not seen as perfect, but seen as more loving and accepting than the other parent. In this case, it is more analogous with families where where psychological needs are neglected and emotional abuse is being perpetrated. In other words, both parents may be at fault. 99% accuracy using the PARQ gap. This is how, obviously, how well this questionnaire works. It's got a 99% accuracy rate. Nothing's ever 100%. We know that. To follow figure 3 demonstrates a 99% chance of accuracy using the 90-point PARQ gap to identify parental alienation. Only one notable exception occurred. Out of the 116 children, a 12-year-old child who was severely alienated from his father produced a gap score of 58 points. His PARQ mother was 67 points, while his PARQ father was 125 points. This exception shows a father who is not seen as all bad, as the child felt his father still loved him. One would surmise the child was taught all bad things about his father, but knew deep down inside that his father loved him. That's important, because that means the child, while being alienated by the mother, he's not taking on the full effect, because he does still know deep down inside. So here again, this is another chart showing how the gaps work, how the number of participants, where they fell, alienated versus non-alienated. Yes. Hang on, I'm going back because we're... Right. Thank you, Bill. It's coming out orange.
These kids were alienated, and these kids are not alienated. So the gap clearly distinguished these from these. And that exception that Joani mentioned is this little kid right here. So there's one child, and there's a cut score of 90 right here. There's one child out of 116 that did not score in the expected area. And so that's how you get accuracy of 99%. That only one child out of more than 100 did not have the expected score. And so that's why it's considered 99% accurate.
There is a lot more to this. There is also an article on this, which did not get quite attached to this properly. When you get the PDF, I did send a corrected one in to Tom, so when you go to download, this is the original article on splitting that the authors had done. I believe there's some newer stuff that will be coming out soon, and when it does, we'll be able to show you it. But you can ask me questions, but definitive authority here is Mr. Bill Burnett in the room. What I would say is this is a phenomenal tool to use in evaluations, because it's not you judging it, it's being judged by a test that has actual scoring criteria to it.
No, the questionnaire is available from Dr. Ronan. The questionnaire has been published. It's easy to get.
That was a question that I was asked several times, yes.
In lots of hundreds of research studies. If you Google the parental acceptance rejection questionnaire, you will find it.
Yes.
Send me an email.
Any other questions?
Did the neglect category include kids who had been abused?
Not that we know.
Okay.
We know that they were abandoned, that they did not. We know that they never saw their dads. They lived with their moms. They never saw their dads for a variety of reasons, either abandonment or alcohol or being in prison or something. That's what we knew about that group.
Bill, would you say that kind of neglected, should there be another something done with neglected versus abused children?
Yeah. Oh, this should be continued with various populations. It should be done, the research should be done on kids with different levels of alienation, mild, moderate, and severe, to see at what point does this splitting pop into place. And it should be done with kids who are abused, mild, moderately, and severely abused, to see whether or not it shows up in any of those. So, the research needs to be continued with these other populations.
But the questionnaire, as it is, in the condition it is in the position that it is in, is very useful. I can't tell you how much between Amy's BSQ, God, I'm gonna get this guy's name wrong from Pennsylvania, Brickland's test. This, I think there's a couple other things. I have something out there called red flag behaviors. All these items help you to say, okay, I got this result with this one. What happens when I do this test? Am I going to get that same result? What happens when I use this test? If I've now gotten 3 or 4 tests that keep coming back to the same thing, then we have a pattern that we can actually definitively state and go into even a court with and say, yeah, I ran 3 special tests. Each of them came back with the following results, leading me to be able to make this statement, evaluation, however you phrase it. And we are really done early, guys. No other questions for Bill?